I'm the Executive Director of the Society for Research in Child Development. I want to welcome you all here today. Thank you so much for coming. There's been a lot of attention paid to the fact that we are becoming a majority-minority society. That is, by the year 2044, fewer than half of the US citizens will be non-Hispanic whites. There's been less conversation about what's happening with children. Children will be a majority-minority next year. So there's a rapid change in the children, the composition and the diversity of the children that are in our country. And so this presents a unique and historic opportunity for us as an organization to lead the conversation and share research that can help children and families and caretakers and practitioners to foster positive, inclusive environments and perspectives on how to exist in this new level of diversity and integration. I am so delighted to be able to welcome you to the second annual lecture in our Child Development in a Diverse Majority Society lecture series that is designed to utilize the research to continue this positive messaging about the transition of our society. We're especially honored at SRCD to be partnering this year with the University of Georgia's College of Family and Consumer Sciences to showcase the exceptional work of a distinguished member of the college faculty, whom SRCD also proudly claims as a vibrant leader in our own organization. I'm so glad that Dr. Emilie Smith has agreed to do this lecture here today. I want to express my deepest gratitude to Dean Linda Fox for welcoming us to this beautiful campus and for agreeing to partner with us on this lecture. I'm pleased now to invite Dean Fox to come and say a few words and introduce our speaker.
Thank you and welcome. The University of Georgia is honored to host the second annual lecture series for the Society for Research in Child Development. My name is Linda Fox. It's my honor to serve as the Dean of the College of Family and Consumer Sciences here at the University of Georgia. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Emilie Smith, professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Science at the University of Georgia, and currently a resident and scholar at the Society for Research in Child Development. Dr. Smith's program of research over the past 25 years has focused on engaging children and families of diverse racial, ethnic, socioeconomic backgrounds in rigorously tested approaches to reduce youth hyperactivity, problem behavior, and promote positive identity and self-development. During her career, Emilie Smith has directed and been involved in over $20 million of funded research to examine the effects of evidence-based practices on children, their caregivers, and care settings. Today, she will present a talk entitled Preparing Racial Ethnic Minority Students for STEM Opportunities, Promoting Identity and Efficacy in Community After-School Programs. Please welcome Dr. Emilie Smith.
Oh my goodness, who are y'all talking about? I'm just so extremely honored to be here today, to be back in Georgia, and to be here with the College of Family and Consumer Sciences and with SRCD. I am honored to be giving this lecture, and my thanks to Laura Namy, who is Executive Director of SRCD, and to Jill Bronstein, who is our Director of Communications at SRCD. I just really thank them for all the effort they've put into this lecture. I also want to thank the Ethnic Racial Issues Committee, because this lecture was the brainchild of that committee under the leadership of Dawn Witherspoon and Eleanor Seaton. It is currently chaired by Gabriella Stein and our very own UGA, Margaret Cahy. I also have deep, deep gratitude to Dean Linda Kirk Fox of the College of Family and Consumer Sciences for her co-sponsorship of this lecture. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for making time to be here, for your support, for just continuing gratitude in so many ways. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the context that we sit in as a university. I'm going to talk about the importance of STEM and review some of the research and some approaches to policy and practice. Hopefully, we all can learn and have a great conversation also afterwards. So here we are at the University of Georgia. The University of Georgia is the first state-supported school chartered in the United States in 1785. Many of you may know that Hamilton Holmes and Charlene Hunter Galt were the first African Americans to enroll at UGA in 1961, 1 year after I was born. Mary Frances Early was the first one to earn a degree, a master's in music education, in 1962. I know that there are ongoing struggles in diversity even here at UGA. I know that there was a video posted, right, with people imitating racist behavior and racist terminology. I also know that the fraternity was expelled and was expended and the students were expelled. And I was thankful for the president's prompt reaction, letting us know that racism is not part of our environment. But still, we are all learning to live together, right? Learning what it means to be a country, learning what it means to support opportunities for everyone. And so this is that ongoing struggle. To me, the Zell Miller Center is so much a part of that. Zell Miller was such an advocate of educational opportunities for all. He was one of the co-founders of the Hope Scholarship, which enables young people from diverse backgrounds to pursue a college education. And so here we are, facing the future, thinking about broadening opportunities not only for college education, but in particular fields that will pay off in terms of career outcomes and hopefully societal benefits as well. So, why is STEM important? Your majors in a number of things, so I'm not dismissing your majors because I am a social scientist as well, right? Human development and family science, and proud of it, right? But still, we do know that 20% of US jobs will require some knowledge of science, technology, engineering, and math. Moreover, workers in these fields earn twice the average of workers in other fields. So we need to prepare a proportionate amount of our students in these STEM fields. Moreover, the United States needs people in these areas, and we need to broaden participation in this area. Because right now, we have a $632 billion trade deficit, and most of that is in technology. So many of the ways in which we were previously a leader as a country in communications, in computers, in motor vehicles, our country is no longer a leader. And so in order to foster the best that our country has to offer, we need to broaden participation in STEM. So the STEM pipeline really is a pathway towards STEM careers. And like any other pipeline, it is long and storied. To have a career in STEM, you need great mentoring, you need to have equal representation and equal salaries for women and racial ethnic minorities. And college is a very important part of preparing for STEM careers, obviously. Not only majoring in STEM, but having important research experiences, faculty mentoring. What faculty do is so important in this pipeline. I'm so proud that UGA has important NSF-funded programs like Includes and LSAMP that are designed to broaden participation. I would say high school, you know, that's important. You remember taking all kinds of AP classes. I'm sure some of our younger members of the audience remember. And not only those AP classes, but having the proper counseling and college prep so that you're ready to go to college and ready for your associated major. It extends to middle school, where, believe it or not, some of the gender disparities in STEM are not evident in middle school. It is later in this pipeline that those begin to appear, many of them related to STEM identity and efficacy. And I would say it begins earlier. It begins in elementary school, is what I will argue, at least in elementary school. And both home and school, and I would argue out of school time, are all important in the STEM pipeline. So what we know is that women have been making all kinds of gains over the past 20 years or so, 25 years or so. As behavioral scientists and psychologists, we make up 50% of those in those fields, and so those have been tremendous gains for women. However, in areas like engineering, women only comprise about 10% of those. My own alma mater, Smith College, has a program specifically in engineering designed to foster women's participation. When we look at STEM, college and STEM degrees by racial ethnic representation, I think one thing we should pay attention to is that African Americans are no longer the largest racial ethnic minority group in the US. Immigrant Latinos of various races are becoming the largest group. And Latinos, African Americans, and Native Americans are underrepresented in college degrees, in STEM highest degree holders, and in STEM occupations. So that is an area of concern. It means we have a disparity there. However, what the research shows us is that when there is participation in STEM careers, the wage gaps between African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans begin to close. And so those in STEM have smaller disparities than they might have in other fields. And this is some of the work of the Pew Research Center. So I think it's really important for underrepresented groups who account for a large proportion of our workforce, a larger proportion of our workforce, but a smaller proportion of STEM, to really have the opportunity to participate in these fields. And it's true for women as well. And again, I'm making the argument that it begins very early. Malcolm in 2012 said 30% of African Americans, Latinos, and American Indians in the 4th grade test below proficiency in math, compared with 8% of Asian Pacific Islanders and 9% of Caucasian 4th graders. So you understand what I mean when I say this disparity begins very early. And so we have to do something about the pipeline. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my theoretical and conceptual frameworks and let you know of why I think some of these might be important in STEM careers. So some of you may be familiar with the idea of stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is the concept that when you are told that your gender or your race might affect your academic performance, particularly your performance on a test, it affects how you perform on the test. If the stereotype threat is not enacted, the scores on the test are more similar across race, ethnicity, and gender. But when it is activated, when you're told that your group might not perform as well, the scores are differential. People say, researchers tell us that it's probably due to the anterior cingulate cortex. It plays a large role in regulating your blood pressure and your heart rate. And what happens is you become anxious, literally, when the stereotype threat is activated and your performance is not as well. So I think that part of the idea of the stereotype threat affects not only individual performance on a test, but entrance into demanding careers as well. So some have come to say that, well, if we can train young people to think differently, maybe we can ameliorate the stereotype threat. Some of the work of historic psychologist Carol Dweck looks at the role of what she calls growth mindset. And there is what you call a fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset means that you think that your intellectual ability and your competencies are fixed and that nothing you do will ever change them. When people with a fixed mindset encounter challenges, they often exhibit helplessness because they say, there's nothing I can do to change this. This is a fact of life. They give up, they don't pursue the challenge, that sort of thing. What Carol Dweck and some of the research of her students as well, David Yeager down in Texas, are looking at is what they call a growth mindset. And this is the idea that your capabilities can be manipulated. With practice, intention, perseverance, you can increase your capacity and your competence. And what they theorize is that those with a growth mindset are more likely to persevere and not give up as easily because they know that in the end, their efforts will be more rewarded. This idea, though, is very important because it means that we have to allow people to make mistakes. We might not be perfect at first. Marva Collins, an educator in Chicago public schools who turned around educational disparities in many ways, said, if you can't make a mistake, you just can't make anything. And so it's important, the role of mistakes and a mindset that allows you to fall forward, right, to fail forward. There's been research on the growth mindset as well, that women and minorities who have growth mindsets have been found to feel more like they belong, even in male-dominated disciplines. There's research that finds that these ability beliefs predict STEM attainment and that they have an impact upon your perceptions of competency, particularly in the STEM areas. However, the meta-analyses, and a meta-analysis is a study of studies that compiles these studies and looks at effects across multiple studies. And some of the meta-analyses say that this is true. A growth mindset does affect STEM motivations. And there's other meta-analyses that say, Well, we're not quite sure that these motivational interventions actually have as large an impact as we expected. If we were in a class, I would ask you why, and we would have a fervent discussion about this. I'm going to say that if you want to come back to that question later, okay? So, is mindset enough? The work of Rich Lerner, who talks about relational developmental systems, says that context and adults are important in the lives of young people as well. Some of the work that the Search Institute, Benson and Scales have been doing over the years, they look at what they call contexts that serve as developmental assets. And in what ways do these assets foster competence, connection, caring? In my research, we've also looked at what ways they might foster cultural values of respect and connection and things of that sort. And that's some of the work that was published in a special section of Child Development on positive youth development, and some of the work that Dawn Witherspoon and Wayne Osgood and I have been doing. My colleague, Reed Larson, and in this case I'm citing Larson and Angus, says that not only are adults important, but allowing young people to engage. That we do so much research on support, but not as much research on letting young people take the helm, letting them lead, letting them learn, letting them make mistakes. And that is really a large part of what Bandura would call efficacy building experiences. And that young people need a little bit of adult guidance and a little bit of adult structure, and we could define what little is, right? But we need to give them the opportunity to experiment, to grow, to try new things in order to build their own sense of efficacy. So my own research in identity has been going on for the past 25, 30 years, depending on how you count, right? So it started with looking at juvenile offenders. And I was very interested in what people call labeling theory and the degree to which if we say this young person is a delinquent, to what extent does it affect the family? What extent does it affect the youth themselves? And what we found is if we involve the family in an intervention that helped them to monitor the child more, to provide more supervision, but yet to involve the young person in community-based activities that they chose, that they wanted to participate in, that it reduced the labeling of the family, of the youth, and it reduced the labeling of the youth of themselves, and it led to a 24% reduction in delinquency. And that is some of my work that was published in 2000 or so. Some of my work, particularly on identity, has been looking at racial ethnic identity, and at a time when people were debating, is racial ethnic identity really related to self-esteem, you know? And we found that for these young fourth grade African-American kids living in urban areas that it was. Our research has further gone on to find that it has relationships to academic achievement as measured by standardized tests. So young people who had a sense of pride in their ability to achieve and learn, they scored higher on standardized tests in their school. And we done developmental research from kindergarten to third and fourth grade and found that this relationship only grows stronger as children advance. And so the benefits of having a positive identity show up in their academic achievement. I also think efficacy is really important, and some of our work has looked at how to build efficacy in community-based after-school programs, how to allow young people to self-regulate or co-regulate each other, and that this ability to build influence among each other really reduces hyperactivity, I would say, by building self-regulation and what I call co-regulation, and that it increases this sense of connection, this sense of caring. And so we are very interested in letting children be responsible in some ways for their own destinies. And so that they can think about, too, the connections between their identity and their future. Daphne Oyserman talks about possible selves. How do they envision what their future might be? And so I'm very interested in how these multiple identities, gender, racial, ethnic, occupational, how do they all intersect? How do they all integrate to affect future youth outcomes? So, factors related to early STEM interests. Again, if we were in class today, I would want to have a conversation with you and let us all talk about it, but I'm going to identify some of these factors, and one of them tends to be the educational background of the parents. Particularly if you have parents who are scientists, you tend to engage a little bit more in scientific activities. People who engage in science hobbies, you know, do the science kits that you might have at home, flying kites even, things that move. All of these things contribute to early interest in STEM. Summer camps. What you see displayed here is our own grandchild's summer science stuff. And in this book, the family provides some science experiments, and they go off and they do them, and they write what happens. And so Jordan has his own book of science stuff, and he has multiple books. So home is a very important place. School, obviously, is a place to learn science, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in detail. And we also say out of school time is a great place to be exposed to STEM. But there are caveats about elementary school STEM. So many young people do not get exposed to much science in elementary school. And part of this is because of No Child Left Behind has really strong accountability demands for how young people should perform in reading and math. And as such, science takes a back seat in the elementary school curriculum. When you think about how much time we devote to science in elementary school, it's about 20 minutes versus about 60 minutes for math and 90 minutes for reading. So we're devoting more time to other subjects and not as much time to science. Whereas reading and math tend to happen daily, science typically happens only on a weekly basis. So in the US, our students are not getting much science exposure. Teacher background matters incredibly too. As you can see, teachers who have a degree in STEM increases from 5% in elementary school to 82% in high school. So many teachers have not had the background in science, although they may be quite capable teachers and have the skills and ability to nurture our children. And that leads to teachers feeling less competent to teach science, whereas they feel very confident teaching reading and math and a little less social studies and certainly less in terms of science. And so that's an issue that needs to be addressed as well. We think there are other school factors associated with pursuing STEM careers, and that is counseling. In some schools differ greatly in terms of the facilities allowed to counseling offices. Some counseling offices have administrators who help keep their schedules, help keep the files, help watch when students need certain courses or certain things to help them proceed in their studies. And then there are other offices, particularly in poorer urban areas, where the counselors have to do it all themselves. And so it's more difficult for them to monitor when students are lacking important courses that will allow them to take advanced courses in high school. So it depends a lot upon youth and parent agency, that young people and their parents have to feel very efficacious themselves in terms of finding out about college, the resources for college, and again, this tends to be vastly confounded with social economic status. What we're finding that counselors really need training in STEM preparation to realize that this is the benchmark. This is when you've got to get a kid in this class and that class and the other class to make sure that they're ready. And then we also find in qualitative research that counselor expectancies play a role in the counseling process as well. And Gloria Lassen-Billings talks a lot about how we have to really allow some diversity in understanding children's learning and instructional processes. And we've had our own experience with that. For those of you who recognize the young man on the screen, I call him the boy who cartwheels. When he was in elementary school, he didn't walk like from here to there. He would walk and cartwheel, walk and cartwheel. So you can imagine what sort of student he was in class. He was the student who, if you didn't give him enough activities, he was probably going to be doing other things. So that's not an unusual phenomenon for many teachers, right? So he had the scores. He scored at the appropriate percentile to be put in advanced math courses when he was moving from elementary school to middle school. But his teacher didn't recommend him for it because she said she didn't think he was emotionally ready for advanced classes. Well, this particular young man has a mother who's a professor. So we were able to change that a little bit, let me say. But not all young people have those kinds of resources. And those are my concerns, that who advocates for the children, who can't necessarily advocate for ourselves. I guess I should tell the positive part of the story, that yes, this boy who cartwheels became the man on the move. And yes, that picture, he is about 6 feet in the air because he was a champion in hurdling, and that is our youngest son, Jonathan. And he does work as a management consulting, digesting data and sharing it with other companies. So it is possible, but there are systems that have to be responsive to foster opportunities for all. So, what do we know about school opportunities for STEM courses? That exposure to STEM courses is a greater predictor of whether or not you will persist in the area than your grades. So that's really interesting, because that means that some people who really have the grades, as in our case, may not go forward if they don't have support in other areas. Jeannie Oakes, in her famous book that she published in 1985 and republished in 2005 because she said it was still an issue, talks about the role of tracking. And she asked us the question, does tracking enhance our abilities or does it limit our abilities? And to me, it's an important question to ask. Adam Gammeren did some research with 12,500 students. And what happened is he opened up algebra to all, which was his statement, algebra for all. And so what was found is some of the lower achieving children made some modest gains when they were able to learn with other more skilled, more academically proficient learners. But the performance of the high achievers was the same, regardless of whether or not they were in homogeneous classes or heterogeneous classes. And so Adam Gammeren is now the president of the W.T. Grant Foundation, and they now have an initiative on reducing inequality, because his research shows that we can make participation more open to all. So my other point here, particularly for our graduate students, is that methods matters a lot. And sometimes students wonder why I care so much about hierarchical linear models, but it's for the same reason that Stephen Rodenbush and Anthony Brick do. Steve's early research was on looking at the expectancies of teachers and looking at the effects of schools and communities on child and family development, and those methods help us to identify inequalities. If we only look at the individual level, we will never know. Some of this data on schools that I am presenting was very difficult to locate. I could locate the data on individual disparities with ease, 30, 40, 50 studies. The data on school level factors was more difficult to find. And so we need to have data analytic approaches and studies that are designed to look at where the disparities and inequalities lie so that we can do something about it. So when we start to look at STEM course taking, when we look by race and ethnicity, the advanced mathematics and advanced science that's taken by African American and Latino young people is less than that among white and Asian young people. And then we can look at what are the offerings. When we look at schools that are greater than 70% African American and Latino, they offer a smaller number of AP math and science courses than schools that have a larger percentage of African American and Latino population. So we don't really make advanced STEM even available to everyone. And we have to think about what are the factors that affect that. I know that's bigger because that's not just tutoring a young person to succeed more in math. It's looking at schools and teachers and how do we get these classes in schools that would not normally have them, right? So my argument is a great way to reduce some disparities would be through the use of out-of-school time. And I'm particularly a fan of out-of-school time, as some of you might know. And there's research that shows that home, school, and community all contribute to STEM interests. And this is some of the research by Angela Calabrese-Barton and some of the work by Kong and Sandy Simpkins. What we find that a large proportion of African American, Latino, and Native American children attend after-school programs. These are programs designed to support working families, and so they're there, and we need programming and after-school program to help them be effective in quality settings. There's research that finds specifically that out-of-school time enhances reading and math, and that's some of the work of Deborah Vandell and her colleagues, Kim Pierce. And a study by the After School Alliance, authored by Krishnamurthy, Ballard, and Noam, finds specifically that out-of-school time, a number of demonstration projects, Tech Bridge, any number of projects, had a positive impact on STEM identity and interest in out-of-school time. The Aspires project in London has similar findings, that it fosters an identity as a scientist. And in the STEM study that was conducted by Rich Lerner and his colleagues, it was found that youth participating in 4-H were twice as likely to participate in STEM in out of school time. So it means we do have the knowledge, we do have the ability to foster STEM learning. For me, particularly as an implementation science, my question is, how do we take this to scale? How do we make it more broadly available to children all across Georgia and all across the country? So, some directions for practice and policies. We need to continue to look at STEM identity and ways to build STEM identity, and we have found some methods that do that. Some people have been, I'm sorry, that's Bowe et al. 2018. Some people are looking at single sex or single gender classrooms and are finding more STEM education in single gender classrooms because people feel more willing to make mistakes. You know, they don't feel as labeled or as stereotyped sometimes when they're in groups by themselves. There's also some research to say that historically black colleges and universities have more STEM majors proportionately than predominantly white institutions or PWIs. But that does not let us off the hook because there are so many resources like right here in Miller Learning Center at places like the University of Georgia that we want to be the place too that fosters STEM learning across gender and race. There have been efforts to look at ways that we can integrate STEM learning into the elementary school curriculum. Can we read, do math, and integrate science into the learning of students in ways that doesn't parse the time so finely for science learning? And as I said, some people have said that the quality of activities in after school are particularly good for promoting STEM. Whereas school is a little more regimented, it's a textbook, it's a lecture, that sort of thing. In after school time, you can sit around tables, you can experiment. You have a little less time, you don't have the stress and the demands of accountability that might hinder your ability to just take your time and learn some things. And so some people say that after school is a really important place to do this. But to me, another important thing is to look at the efficacy and the competencies of the adults who are serving young people, that they've come from generations where they might have had a stereotype threat affect them as well. And so how do we build systems that foster their training and engagement so that they feel comfortable and confident teaching the next generation about science, technology, engineering, and math? And so I hope that you will join me in thinking about solutions for the next generation, for this generation, because what I believe is that what we do now in our homes, in our schools, in out of school time affects us now and for the future. And I believe it's time to prepare for the broader participation of all in opportunities that will be fulfilling and rewarding individually and for our country. Thank you. Thank you.